Hi, my name is Shane Boyer. I'm a senior cloud developer advocate, and today we're going to be talking about developing ASP.NET Core 2 apps with Azure. We're going to cover what's new in .NET Core, Razor Pages, ASP.NET Core and containers, running ASP.NET apps on Azure, application insights, and then DevOps. A quick roadmap about what's in .NET Core. We've got 1.0, .NET Standard 1.0 through 1.6, obviously 1.0, and then Entity Framework Core 1.0 as well. Moving forward, just recently we've released .NET Core 2.0. Inclusive of that is the .NET Standard 2.0. Most recently, EF Core and .NET Core for ASP.NET as well has also been released. Just talking a little bit about the evolution of .NET. In February of 2002, we released 1.0, and then moving forward through the full framework up through October of 2017, we've released 4.7.1. It's important to note that the full framework will continue to release framework additions as well as security releases, so we will continue to evolve the framework and features as the timeline moves forward. In August of 2017, .NET Core 2.0 was released, and most recently this month, we've talked about the roadmap for ASP.NET Core 2.1. So let's talk a little bit about ASP.NET Core 2.0. We've expanded the platforms that we're continuing to support. Most importantly is the Linux box. If you look at the distributions for Linux that we're supporting, Red Hat, CentOS, and the other flavors of Linux will continue to evolve. We should probably update the list a little bit for Windows. Obviously, Server 2016 now is available, and we're continuing the support for the Mac OS releases too. So when you're looking at your choice of tools for developing ASP.NET applications, obviously we've got the breadth of the Visual Studio family. Visual Studio 2016, it was available for your development. VS Code, also available on Mac and Linux. And then when you have the IDE as well for Mac called Visual Studio for Mac. That will continue to improve if you're doing your mobile development for your Xamarin apps. So .NET Standard has also been released. Now we're at 2.0. A little quick note about .NET Standard. .NET Standard is just the interface, where .NET Core 2.0 is one of the many implementations. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. This slide here displays a little bit about the platforms that we're supporting when it comes to .NET. We've got our desktop applications with UWP, the cloud platforms with ASP.NET, .NET Core, and then also mobile development with Xamarin. As we explained with the tooling, Visual Studio, VS for Mac, and also VS Code will support all your development needs for across the platform. Again, that .NET Standard library will support any of your development for any of these platforms too. When we're talking about sharing the code, a little backstory for this is in our early versions of .NET development, we really didn't have a need to share the code. We just had one platform. It was usually web or it was for Windows, and there was really no sharing of the code. The big problem came with Silverlight. There was less APIs in really the full .NET. We had a little bit of compatibility, a little bit of portability. And their solution came with adding files as link. There wasn't a really good story there. We would just kind of preventively develop the sharing of code. And we had the add as link. So we would right click, add the libraries as a link, and that would add it to our solution. The next solution that came up was our portable class libraries. And this was the next evolution of sharing code. We select our profile for compatibility, and the result was this intersection or kind of Venn diagram, which really came down to what was the least common denominator of the available APIs that came across what was available for each of the platforms. This is still available today, but it's listed as a legacy portable project type in Visual Studio. When this first came available, there was a prompt that came in Visual Studio that had us select what was available for each project type. So as you selected each one of the frameworks that you were going to support with your portable class library, the available APIs started to reduce, and you'll get this prompt saying the following would be available depending on what targeted platform you get. And at one point, even Xbox was available there, and the available APIs would start to reduce for your development needs. So when .NET Standard 1.0 came out, this kind of opened up the available platforms that we were able to develop against by having this one standard base class library to target for all of your development needs. .NET 1.6 came out. We were able to expand the APIs that we were able to target. And most recently with the 2.0 release, we opened up the total APIs to over 20,000, looking at all the most popular NuGet packages that were out there available to broaden that spectrum of APIs and platforms as we looked at the total amount of packages that were out there. So looking at the APIs and .NET Standard that are available now just from standard.NET, data, XML, serialization, all of these packages are now available for you to take advantage of in your development. Previously, you may have looked at something like dataset or data table and gone through a massive conversion in your code to make it available to you for your applications. Instead of now having to go through that conversion, you can now just reference those types and use them straight out of the box. So now that this is more compatible, we can just use them without any recompilation and just reference those existing assemblies in your applications. We also have the Windows Compatibility Pack available to you for your UWP applications. We have to have that separate, obviously, because we can't reference these Windows-specific APIs in something like a web application. So let's look at something like a .NET Standard 2.0 application and what that means. So if I look at creating a new console application in Visual Studio, I'll let this fire up. And what I'm going to look at is actually referencing an old zip library that has not taken advantage of the .NET Core specifications, and they haven't updated their particular package in quite some time. So what I'll do here is I will manage my NuGet packages. And I'll go ahead and look for this package. Actually, I think it's just called zip. So I'm looking at sharp zip lib. And if we look at when this was actually date published was January 11th of 2011. It hasn't been updated in over 7 years. If I try to install this, I get a prompt that says, this is not available for my package, right? So if I hit OK, it's going to try and install it. And since we're taking advantage now of the .NET Standard, it makes changes to my application to convert my app to make this available to me. And now I can take advantage of these older packages without having to make changes to the source code from this particular package. And I can move forward and take advantage of now .NET Standard 2.0 without making changes to their code or my code and move forward with my application development. There's over 20,000 NuGet packages out that we now support, and that list will continue to grow by having these capabilities. So ASP.NET Core 2.0 is also now available. In ASP.NET Core 1.0, we made a big gain with our performance benchmarks, and now with Core 2, those benchmarks are also growing. We look at a comparison to ASP.NET 4.6. You can see the difference here that we're even making huge gains over as far as performance and requests per second. It's even easier to get started with these applications. We're reducing the amount of work that you've got to do to harness your applications. You use this Kestrel, which is our built-in web server. We use www as the default content route, so there's no configuration there as far as where your static assets are going to live. We have a default configuration and logging built into the application. Through dependency injection, you can use the logger or the configuration management there. And then we, by default, also have IIS integration. One of the other great things that we've put in here is an ASP.NET Core all meta package. And what this means is, instead of trying to figure out what NuGet package you need to do SQL connectivity or configuration or JSON parsing, things like that. We have one meta package that you reference or is referenced by default in a new project. We put all of that on disk for you, and when the application is actually built and published, we figure out what you need in order to publish the actual project and reduce the amount of files that are pushed to production. Your build and runtime optimizations, as I mentioned before, we're putting all of those NuGet packages in that meta package on disk in a NuGet fallback folder. So as you're building your application, we have reference materials on disk through IntelliSense. There's also Razor View pre-compilation. This means that we're not waiting for that first time hit on the server in order to compile those views prior to them being sent down to the browser. Razor Pages is a new feature in ASP.NET Core. This is your ability to create views without controllers. Instead of having a full MVC, a model view controller type of application, this is just creating the views with a page model code behind. This is a really good way to get started with .NET Core applications on the web without having to go through the ceremony of understanding what the model view controller method is about, and a lot easier to get just standard web applications going. So how do we get started with ASP.NET Core development? The first place you can go is go to .NET/Core, install Visual Studio from visualstudio.com, and you can also download Visual Studio Code if you want to get started with a quick IDE. So let's look at a quick demo for Razor Pages. If I look at Visual Studio here and do File, New Project, and I just choose a web application, and I hit OK. Now I have an option to just choose Web App, and what that is going to give me by default is a Razor Pages application. It's not Model View Controller, we're just choosing Web App. You'll see that we've got ASP.NET Core 2.0 by default, and when we hit OK, it'll fire up that new web application for us. And you notice we have a new file structure where we just have this new folder called Pages. And in Pages, we'll have, by default, index CS/HTML. A Razor page is defined by an @page model. So we have @page here. It defines the model here, which is @model. And you'll see that we're just defining an @page title, or @viewData title, which says homepage. This is kind of where our actual model data, which is normally you'd think of it as a class that we would tie to a page model. And then everything else is just our normal Razor Pages code that we have in our HTML. If I expand this and I look at the CS file behind it, you'll see that we've got our normal HTTP verbs on the back end. We've got an on get. So when we make a request to the page, this is our HTTP get. And at this point, we've got no code in here and the code behind, but this would return the actual page, rendering our normal HTML with a homepage title on it. We've got an about, a contact. So if I wanted to create a new page, in here, we could just say right-click our pages and hit add and had new Razor page here and not have any actual view, the model view controller that we may have typically seen in past versions. Let's talk a little bit about getting our applications that we've built into the cloud, into Azure, and talk about the Azure portions of this presentation. We've got a lot of options when it comes to hosting, depending on your needs when it comes to putting your applications in the cloud. We have standard web apps when it comes to hosting, and then we've got web apps for containers. So the two differences are web apps is I would just be able to host this in your standard shared hosting type of environment in Azure. Web apps for containers is using Docker and the Docker container methods. We can host it on Windows or on Linux. And then we have container instances, which is our fast hosting for container instances. If I want to have temporary services or if I'm writing a console app that does some high processing of images or batch jobs, I can wrap my application in a Docker container and have those fire up, process the workloads, and then fire down, and only be charged for the time that it actually runs. Our Azure Kubernetes service is our managed Kubernetes service in Azure. If I wanted to run highly distributed systems on Kubernetes, we have that offering as well. So if I'm running large microservice type of applications, we can do it in there. And then we also have our Service Fabric offering too for large systems. So how do we put our ASP.NET Core applications in containers? What does that look like for us? So if I just go back to our Razor Pages application, Visual Studio's got Docker tools built in into the workloads here. And if I just wanted to add a Docker capabilities or Docker support here, if I just right click on our project file and hit add and hit Docker support, it's going to ask me what targeted system do I want to run. By default, Docker runs on the Linux host, so I'm going to just keep it at Linux. That's how I have my machine configured. And what this will do is actually detect the type of project that I'm running. It's going to see that I'm running ASP.NET Core and create the Docker assets that I need in order to containerize my application. By adding Docker support, it creates this multi-stage Docker file for me, which will actually build and create the image assets that I need in order to publish this to the cloud. So I can publish this to Azure Container Registry or Docker Hub, and then ultimately through the publish monikers that we have in Visual Studio, push this to one of these publishing or in hosting scenarios that I talked about previously, either Kubernetes or Service Fabric or even Azure App Service using containers. So when we talk about putting our applications in the cloud, the other things that come up are, how is my application doing? What's the metrics? What are the errors? What are the analytics around some of the things there? And that's where Application Insights comes in for ASP.NET Core, as well as other types of applications. But specifically, we've got some great add-ins and capabilities when it comes to .NET Core applications running in Azure. Without doing any code changes to your app, when we upload an application, when you publish a .NET Core application to Azure, we will detect that it's this type of app, and in the Azure portal, you'll be prompted to say, hey, we can automatically instrument your .NET application and install the Azure extension for Application Insights right into your app. And what happens is when your application fires up, we'll actually inject the capabilities to instrument your application without you making any code changes, and you can automatically take advantage of App Insights and all of its capabilities without making any code changes. The capabilities that App Insights gives you is you can see a full application map from your ASP.NET Core application. So if you're calling additional services, calling storage, calling database backends, we can see the exact trace of your app and all of its dependencies downstream from the front end. You can look at performance charts and configure custom charts related to your application and look at requests per second, your AJAX calls, how's the page view traffic has changed, see what errors are occurring in your application too. You can analyze the failures through some of these charts and the capabilities that are there and look at what's happened over a period of time, and then even drill down further into some of these capabilities. You can even look at in specific errors down to the actual line of code that's happening within your application. And then from there, even create work items tied to your Visual Studio team system and assign that to additional developers on your team to fix. If you want to add this capability into your apps through code, it's really just by typing a single line of code in your build host, and it's use Application Insights. Additionally, if you want to take advantage of wiring up the custom logging, you can use the line just below that and use Azure App Services, and that will enable the custom logging that's available in Azure too. So talking about deploying applications, other than just right-clicking and doing the publishing through the Visual Studio capabilities, we also have DevOps and continuous delivery capabilities that you can actually configure a DevOps pipeline through Visual Studio or even through GitHub deploy, through VSTS, or even within the Azure portal. We have a new DevOps project where you can configure your .NET Core applications and configure those pipelines right from Azure. So to look at some additional resources, definitely check out the docs.microsoft.com. We've got .NET Core and ASP.NET Core resources there. Our blogs on MSDN, the live.asp.NET community stand-up that happens every Tuesdays. And then we also have our code conversations on Channel 9. So thanks for checking out the Tech Summit content on ASP.NET Core. And be sure to ask questions and visit our tech community hubs as well. Thank you.